Hi Gr10s, this is the first video of today, Trig Equations. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at when there's a trig function, an angle and a ratio, and then we're going to find the size of angles in the first quadrant. It's very important that you watched and did the exercises on finding the size of an angle before this. So make sure that section is covered before you can do this one. Okay, so let's start by looking at a trig equation. So sine x is equal to a half. What does that mean? So sine x is equal to half, so that means, so what we can gather here, there's an angle x, a reference angle x, and then the ratio of sine of course means the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. That ratio is in the ratio 1 to 2. In other words, if there's this equation, there's this triangle, right, and that is angle x, the ratio of the opposite side over the hypotenuse side, so this is your opposite, that's your hypotenuse, that of course is your adjacent, the ratio of the opposite to the hypotenuse is 1 to 2, so that will be 1 to 2. That doesn't mean the opposite side is 1 and the hypotenuse is 2, right? It must just be in the ratio of 1 to 2. So in other words, it could also have been, that could also have been x, right? We only work in right angle triangles. So in other words, this could have also been 5 and then that 10, as long as the hypotenuse is, so the hypotenuse here is double the size of the adjacent. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's sine of the angle is equal to the ratio then, opposite over the hypotenuse. So what did you do in the previous section when you were given two side lengths? You would write down the equation and then you just solve it, right? You would then use the shift function in your calculator. We can say shift for the next couple of lessons, but in essence what you are doing is you are finding the arcsine of the ratio, and then that is equal to the angle, right? So let's just go quickly, let's just define each of those little components. X is the angle, so it's sine of x, so sine of a certain reference angle, okay, so sine of a certain angle there, and then the half, what is the half there? That is the ratio of whatever the trig function is. Okay, so why is this important? Is we want to get it into this form. I mean, if you get that, it's actually quite straightforward. So what you just do is, it's sine x is equal to half, so what you just do is you write down arcsine of the ratio, and that will kick out for me the angle, all right? So let's look at this. Right, and then how do we work this out? Make sure you calculate in degree mode. So you press shift sine, right? So it looks like sine -1 is not to the power of -1, that's just a notation. And then so it's shift sine, we call that arcsine, and then you type in the ratio, 1 divided by 2, in other words 0.5, and you press equal, that is 30 degrees. What does that mean? That means that x is then equal to 30 degrees. The reference angle, in other words, is going to equal to 30 degrees. And I'm going to emphasize that the whole time. So when we work out the value of x here, it's the reference angle that we are referring to. Okay. Let's look at a very just a straightforward example, just another one. So for example, if I say what is cos x is equal to a half, how would you know what x is? Well, in a similar sense, let's just have the triangle. You don't need to do it with the triangle, but I do think it's important just to understand what's going on here. So, well, if this is my reference angle, of course, that's my adjacent side, that's my opposite side, and that's my hypotenuse side. Goodness. And what is so the ratio of cos is your adjacent over your hypotenuse. So in other words, it is 1 over 2. All right. I mean, you can work out the opposite with using Pythagoras. You would know it's the root of 3, hopefully. So therefore, Okay, that doesn't mean the adjacent side is 1, the hypotenuse is 2. It's just in the ratio of 1 to 2. So the adjacent side could be 4 and the hypotenuse can be 8. The adjacent side can be 2 and the hypotenuse can be 4. You know, you get the idea. Okay, so what do we do? And how do we do it? So what you're going to do is you've got a trig function here of cos. It is in the nice format, so it's a trig function. That is the reference angle, and we've got the ratio. So in other words, if you want to work out the angle, it's going to be arc cos, right? Shift cos of the ratio, right? The ratio is a half, and then that's going to kick out if you're just going to put in your calculator arc cos of a half, shift of a half, and then that is equal to 60 degrees, right? Great, but you actually know that from those special angles. Hopefully you remember that. Okay, so but let's make this a little bit more complicated. So some of you are already asking, but how is this going to get more complicated? No, it's not actually getting that bad. So if I would ask you then, so what is 2 sine x is equal to a half? All right, so there's now we multiply sine x by 2, so there's a coefficient. Our objective is still to get a trig function, all right? And then the angle, all right, and that is equal to a ratio. That's what we want. We want, a coefficient of 1 there. Okay, so if there's a coefficient of 1, what do I need to do? What's the opposite of timesing by 2 sine x? Dividing by 2 sine x. So therefore, sine x is equal to a quarter, right? A half divided by 2 is equal to a half times by 1 over 2, which is a quarter. And that's in the format. We've got a trig function, we've got the reference angle, and we've got the ratio. So therefore, x is going to equal to arcsine of the ratio. The ratio is equal to a quarter. So therefore, what is that equal to? What is arcsine of a quarter? That is equal to 14.47, right? So if you type that on your calculator, so it's 14.4775 and so onwards. And it depends on the question how far we round off, but so by default you round off to 2 decimal places, so that's 14.48 degrees. All right, so the reference angle of sine is going to be 14.48 degrees when the ratio is equal to a quarter. So that first part there is just to add on in the beginning, all right? And when we're going to do trig functions, trig equations trig graphs a bit later, then that will be a bit more clear that we're actually finding the intercept of two different graphs. Okay, but for now, that's what you want a trig function. You want the angle, and that must be equal to the ratio. If you've got that, life is good. It's not too bad. All right. So if we've been presented with a question like sine of x is equal to √3 over 5, okay, so again, just what does that mean? That means it's a right angle triangle, there's an x reference angle, the opposite over the hypotenuse is in the ratio √3 to 5, all right. Again, what will we do? We would just go, well, it's in that form, so for trig function, angle is equal to ratio, so the arcsine, shift sine, of the ratio, √3 over 5, is going to equal to that reference angle. And if you type that then on your calculator, you're going to get x is going to equal to 20.2679, blah, 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 blah. So if you round off to 2 decimal places, that will be 20.27 degrees. Right, so the reference angle is 20.27 degrees when the ratio of a sine function is √3 over 5. Okay, but let's turn this around quickly. So if I ask you sine x is equal to something like root 5 over 2. Okay, so root 5 over 2. Okay, so what's happening here? So how would you do this question? So what we've got now is we've got a trig function, right? And then x is equal to, is the reference angle, and then again this is the opposite over the hypotenuse, that is √5, and then this is √2. Okay, we've got a bit of an issue here. You might not notice it immediately. What is wrong there with that triangle? Is that a possible triangle? No, it's not. Because what is the square root of 5? The square root of 5 is equal to 2.23 and so on. 2.23, right? 2.23, da da da. Okay. But the hypotenuse, which is supposed to be the longer side, is only 2. So what's cracking with that? No, that's not possible to draw that triangle. Your hypotenuse must be the longer side. Okay, so this is a very important part. In other words, and you would actually notice it immediately, if you work out what is root 5 over 2 on your calculator, so if you go square root of 5 divided by 2, that is equal to 1.11118 and so onwards. Okay, if your ratio of sine and cos is greater and including 1, that's a bit of an issue, because that means if it's equal to 1, that means the opposite side and the hypotenuse side have the same length, right? I mean, that's impossible. If it is more than 1, that means in a sine function the opposite is greater than the hypotenuse, and in a cos function the adjacent side is greater than the hypotenuse. Something is a bit weird there, alright? So, of course, if you're going to type in what is arcsine of root 5 over 2 on your calculator is going to throw a tantrum and say, error, there's something weird in the neighborhood. There's the opposite, the ratio of the opposite over the hypotenuse is greater than 1. I mean, something is wrong. Okay, so, yeah, just take note of that. Right, I'm going to run through a couple of different questions now. I mean, so what can we do to it? So I already did a question where there's a coefficient that's not 1. Remember, we did that question of 2 sine x is equal to a half. Now, what happens if it's sine 2x? Is sine 2x equal to 2 sine x? Okay? No. This means that 2 there means double the angle, right? This is double the angle. This means double the ratio of sine x. Those are two very, very different things. Okay, so don't confuse them. Okay, so what do we need? Our objective is to have it in the form where there's a trig function, there's an angle, and then there's a ratio. Yes, it's in that form. Great stuff. So what do I need to do? So the angle is going to equal to arcsine of the ratio. So the angle, the reference angle, right? 2x is going to equal to arcsine of a half. If you type in arcsine of a half in your calculator, you're going to get 30 degrees. Therefore, okay, and so that is the so that is your angle there. That's referring to your angle there, and then a half. So therefore, we can say in the first quadrant, and all these questions are just going to be in the first quadrant. Then x is going to equal to 15 degrees. You just solve for x. Okay. Good question, guys. So in other words, if I had, let's have cos, so if it was cos 3x is equal to a half, how would you do it? Is it in the right form? Yes. Trig function, angle, ratio, whippy yay. So therefore, 3x, the angle, right, is equal to arc cos of the ratio, a half. So therefore, 3x is equal to arc cos of a half. And what is arc cos of a half? If you press shift cos half in your calculator, you're going to get 60 degrees. So therefore, what is x then? Divide both sides by 3. X is going to equal to 20 degrees. Well, in the first quadrant, right? So, let's do another couple of them. All right, let's turn up the heat here. So if I've got sine 2x plus by 10 degrees is equal to a half, how does that change it? What change? What? So let's see. We've got a trig function, we've got an angle, and we've got a ratio. That's not bad, man. So how do you find the angle? Well, so we've got 2x plus by 10 degrees is equal to arcsine, right? So it's a sine, so it's arcsine. Half, and what is the ratio? The ratio is equal to a half. So arcsine of a half is equal to my angle, 2x plus by 10. Okay, so step by step, 2x plus by 10 degrees, therefore, is going to equal to what? Arcsine of a half. If you put arcsine of a half in your calculator, but by now you should know arcsine of a half is equal to 30 degrees. Great stuff. So therefore, 2x plus by 10 degrees is equal to 30 degrees. What is x then equal to in the first quadrant? So what you're going to do, first of all, you're going to minus 10 on both sides. So 30 degrees minus 10 degrees. So 2x then is equal to 20 degrees. And therefore, what is x? What are you going to do? You're going to divide both sides by 2. Therefore, x is equal to 10 degrees. Let's look at the next one. So if you given a question like cos 3x minus 30 degrees is equal to a half. Do we have it in the right form? Trig function, angle, ratio. Yes. So let's go for it. So therefore, we've got the angle, which is 3x minus 30 degrees, is equal to arc cos of a half, right? Shift cos of that ratio, a half. So what is, so 3x minus 30, just leave it there. What is arc cos of a half? Well, that is equal to 60 degrees. Just type it in your calculator. But remember from special angles, and therefore we now need to solve for x. So how do I get x alone? First thing we'll do is add 30 on both sides, so that will be 60 degrees plus 90 degrees. So 3x is going to equal to 150 degrees. So therefore, what is x equal to? That is equal to 50 degrees. Alright, so what happens if we've got 2 cos 3x minus 30 is equal to a half? Do we have it in that order? Trig function, angle, ratio. There's a 2 there that's irritating us. How do you get rid of the 2 times by that? You would? Yes. Well done. I heard you. You need to divide by 2 on both sides. And so what is a half divided by 2? That again is a quarter. And then you just do the whole thing from there on, eh? So now it's in the right order. Trig function, angle, ratio. So therefore, what's happening now? So we're going to say the angle, which is 3x minus 30 degrees, is equal to arc cos of a quarter. So therefore, 3x minus 30 degrees is going to equal to arc cos of a quarter. If you press shift cos, arc cos on your calculator, the ratio is a quarter, 1/4. You're going to get 75.522. And you include all those decimals. So the only thing now you do is you say plus 30 there. So plus 30, you're going to get, therefore, 3x is equal to 105.5224878. You have it still all the decimals, and then you're just going to say divide by 3. So x therefore is equal to 35.174162. Okay, and say for example, if we would round off to 2 decimal places, you would then say it's 35.10. So 35.17 degrees. All right, so that's kind of it. All right, yeah, good question. I know you've all been thinking, oh, but what about a square? What about a square? What happens if I've got sine square x is equal to a half, or cos square is equal to square x is equal to a half? Can't talk anymore. So what do we do? What's the process? Well, it's exactly the same. What does this mean? So just before we do that, just quickly, if I say to you sine square x, that is exactly the same as saying sine x all square. That, in other words, means sine x times by sine x, right? Okay, so that's what that means. So sine square x is sine x all square. You're not squaring the angle, you're squaring the function. You're squaring the sine function. Okay, so we just need to just make sure that is clear. So what do I do? So in other words, this is the same. You don't need to do this the whole time, but this is the same as saying sine x square is equal to a half. All right? So what is the opposite of squaring? Okay, so what did we do in equations? I don't want to square. I don't want to square. How do I get rid of the square? I would square root both sides of the equation. Remember, you can't square root individual terms or square individual terms. You remember the 11th commandment, thou shalt only square root, or whatever the form of root, the whole of the left-hand side and the whole of the right-hand side. So what we're going to do is we're going to square root here, and we're going to square root there. So we've got, oh my greatness. So there we've got sine x all square, and there we've got a half. Right. So what is the square root of sine x all square? That will just be sine x. Well, that's kind of why you did it. But what do I need to remember again? If I square root over an equation, what do I need to remember? There's a plus and a minus. Yes, very critical. Plus and a minus. All right? So therefore, what is the square root of a half? So if you type in your calculator, so that is the square root of 1/2, and then that is going to equal to, it's like that root 2/2. So it's plus or minus the root 2/2. Okay. In grade 10, just for now, we are only going to use the positive ratio. So in other words, we're only going to say sine x is equal to root 2 over 2. There's still a negative ratio, and later on we're going to do something with reduction formulae, and but that's extension stuff. Just for now, we are only going to work with a positive ratio. Okay, so how would I solve this question then? Well, that's easy, right? X is just going to equal to arcsine of root 2 over 2. You type that in your calculator. You actually don't even need to type it in your calculator, because you know what the answer is going to equal to. You know it's going to equal to 45 degrees. Remember that sine of 45 degrees is 1 over root 2 or root 2 over 2. Okay, so, but yeah, if you don't know it, type in your calculator. The same story with cos. So if I've got cos square x is equal to half, that's the same as saying cos x square is equal to a half. How do I get rid of the square? I would square root on both sides, right? Square root. So cos x is equal to, and we would say, well, it's plus or minus. It's plus or minus the square root of a half, which is then root 2 over 2. Okay? Good, or 1 over root 2, that's the same thing. So, and then that actually means we've got two solutions just for now, okay? We're just going to use the positive solution, right? Root 2 over 2, okay? And therefore, what is cos of root 2 over 2? Our cos of root 2 over 2 is going to equal to x, right? That's my angle. And therefore, what is x equal to? That's equal to 45 degrees. Alright, so if the next part is just if there's more than one term, so we're going to do this, and then we're going to put everything together. So the first problem is, the first question asks itself, is it in the right form? Trig function is equal to the ratio. There's like a plus 1. What are you doing there, plus 1? So let's minus it on both sides. So sine x, therefore, is equal to 1.5 minus 1, which is equal to a half. Is it now in the right format? Yes. Trig function, angle, ratio, go. So therefore the angle is equal to arcsine of a half. And what is arcsine of a half? That is equal to, again, that's equal to 30 degrees. Okay, what would happen if we put it all together? So that's not too bad, eh? If there's, you just want to get the one term alone, so if there's like a plus or minus, if there's separate terms, you just get rid of it. You just want your function alone. Okay, so let's see if we put something horrendous together. So something like this. This is kind of like the most difficult this kind of will get. So plus 1 is equal to, I don't know, 1.5. Yeah, let's just, sorry, not very creative there. So arcsine of 2x plus by 30 plus 1 is equal to 3 over 2. So first of all, is it in the format that we want, where it's the function, angle is equal to a ratio? Not yet, because we've got the 2x, okay, so 2x plus by 30 is my angle, so we need to, but we've got that lazy plus 1 there, so minus 1 on both sides, so then we get a half. Is it now in the form function is equal to the ratio? Not yet, we've got a function square. We don't want a function square, just want the function. So what do I do? Again, there you would square root on both sides of the equation, right? So in other words, what's the square root of sine square of an angle, all right? And what's the square root of a half? And remember, we should put there actually plus or minus, but we're only going to deal with a positive ratio just for now. So, or this here rather. So sine 2x plus by 30 is going to equal to plus or minus the root of a half. All right, so therefore, what is that equal to? That means sine 2x plus by 30 is equal to, and just for the positive ratio now, so it's plus root 2 over 2. Okay, that's 0.87, and so on. Okay, so what do I do now? I'm going to go arcsine. Is it now in the right order? Sorry, just before I do that, there's my trig function, there's my angle, there's my ratio. Is that now in the right format? Yes, it is. So it's arcsine. So we're going to go arcsine of root 2 over 2 is equal to, and then the angle, that's equal to the angle, of course. The angle is equal to arcsine of the ratio. Okay, and what is arcsine of root 2 over 2? 45 degrees is equal to 2x plus by 30. So therefore, 2x then is equal to minus 30 on both sides. So 2x is equal to 15 degrees. And therefore, what is x equal to? X is equal to 7.5 degrees. Alright, so we're almost done. But what about those reciprocal functions? What are the reciprocal functions again? Okay, so let's just go through it. So the the straightforward functions, the main function sine x is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, right? So cos of a reference angle is equal to the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse, and then tan of x is equal to the opposite side divided by the adjacent side, those ratios. So the reciprocal function of sine again is cosec x, and that is just the reciprocal of sine. So in other words, the opposite and hypotenuse, they just swap around, right? It's 1 divided by that. So, of course. So then we've got sec x is equal to then hypotenuse over the adjacent, and then we've got the reciprocal of tan is cot x, and that is the adjacent then over the opposite. Okay, so you just need to, if you know sine, right, you know cosec, because it's just, the reciprocal of that. Opposite of hypotenuse is hypotenuse over opposite. If you know cos, you know sec, right? That's just the reciprocal, and tan, of course, goes together with cot. All right, but what if you've been presented with a question which you need to solve? For example, sec x is equal to 2, all right? So how do I solve for x? Okay, so that's kind of a difficult one, because if you look at your calculator, there's not a sec button. Oh my greatness, what do you do? So, what do you do? But you don't know what sec is. But what is sec? Sec is the reciprocal of what? Which function? Sec is the reciprocal of cos. So, in other words, another way to write sec x is to write 1 over cos x. And that then is equal to 2. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So in other words, if I gave you cosec x is equal to 2, you would write 1 over sine x is equal to 2. Similar fashion, if I ask you what is if cot x is equal to 2, you would write down 1 over tan x is equal to 2. Okay, so that's not too bad, eh? So sec x, cosec x, cot x. So, and then what do I do now? I don't want cos x on the bottom, so what do I need to do? I need to multiply cos x on both sides here, right? So multiply cos x there, and also multiply cos x there, okay? In the similar sense, I'm going to multiply sine x there, and I'm going to multiply sine x there, and I'm going to multiply tan x there, and I'm going to multiply tan x there. So therefore, what's up? So on the left-hand side, what is cos x times by 1 over cos x? That is equal to 1. And then the right-hand side there is equal to 2 cos x. Cool? And how do I get cos x alone now? I just divide by its coefficient there, or its factor there. So, not factor, just the coefficient, 2 multiplied by cos x. So you divide by 2 on both sides. So therefore, cos x is equal to 1/2. Whew, that's nice now. That's much better. Okay, what is arc, in other words, if we're going to do this question then, what is arc cos of 1/2 going to equal to, right? It's in the right order. So we've got trig function, we've got the angle, is equal to the ratio. So arc cos of the ratio 1/2 is equal to x is equal to 60 degrees, if you type that in your calculator. Okay, next one. So cosec x is equal to 2, so therefore, we say cosec x is 1 over sine x, okay, is equal to 2. I don't want this sine x over, sine x on the denominator. Bit of a cheeky rascal. How do I get rid of it? You multiply sine x on both sides. So, what does that become? 1 is equal to 2 sine x. Check it out. So therefore, sine x is equal to 1 over 2. And what does that mean then? So x is equal to arcsine of 1/2. Alright, the angle is equal to arcsine of 1/2. So x then is equal to, what's arcsine of 1/2? 30 degrees. Okay, don't stress when you see these. It's just one extra step. Alright, lastly we've got cot x is 1 over tan x, so you multiply tan x on both sides. So 1 is equal to 2 tan x. Divide by 2 on both sides, tan x is equal to 1/2. So therefore, arc tan of 1/2 is equal to x, right? The angle is x. So therefore, what is arctan of a half? If you type in your calculator arctan of 1 divided by 2, 0.5, you're going to get 26.5650. So you round off to 2 decimal places, 26.57 degrees. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, don't freak out when you see sec, cosec, and cotec. If some of you are getting hot flashes now, just calm down. All right, it's not too bad. Okay, let's just have another cup. Okay, so first of all, let's just recap. What's the reciprocal function of cosec? In other words, if you see cosec, you think 1 over sine x. If you think sec, you think 1 over cos x. And if you see cot x, you think 1 over tan x. And you just swap those reciprocals around. What's the mathematics behind that? Because it's 1 divided by the reciprocal. And then, of course, if you go 1 divided by half, that becomes 2 over 1, right? So you swap those around. All right. Okay, so let's do a difficult one. 2 cosec 3x is equal to 8. What happens here? Okay, what's the first thing we want to get? Okay, so first of all, we want to get rid of that divide by 2, that cheeky rascal there. So divide by 2 on both sides, so 8 divided by 2 is equal to 4. Oh my word, cosec x. Calm down, calm down. What is cosec? Cosec is nothing else than just 1 over sine x. Alright? So in other words, 1 over sine 3x. Calm down, it's not too bad. Okay? Is equal to 4. Okay, now what do? How do I get rid of the divide by sine 3x? Cheeky rascal there. So I need to multiply sine 3x on both sides, right? So in other words, we've got sine 3x times by 1 over sine 3x is equal to sine 3x times by 4. So what is sine 3x times by 1 over sine 3x? Well, that's just 1, right? That's why we multiplied that on both sides to get it away. So on the right-hand side, then we've got 4 sine 3x. Is it in the right order yet? No, it's not. There's a freaking 4 in front. So how do I get rid of the freaking 4? I divide the freaking 4 on both sides. So a quarter is equal to sine 3x. What do I do now? I need to find, now it's in the right order, right? We've got trig function, angle, ratio. So therefore, arcsine of the ratio, of course, is equal to 3x. And what is arcsine of a half? If you press shift sign of 1 over, no half, sorry, a quarter, arcsine of a quarter is equal to 14.4775, blah, blah, blah. And then you divide that answer by 3, you're going to get x is going to equal to 4.825. So in other words, if you round that to 2 decimal places, they will always specify it will be 4.83. Okay, hopefully that makes sense.